So a few weeks ago, we started our discussion on how to make Descent into Avernus more interesting by looking at sort of the cosmic underpinnings of the D&D universe. We're going to delve a bit deeper into this by looking at Asmodeus and the Pact Primeval and how that affects the rest of the adventure and how to understand evil in relation to Descent into Avernus. Obviously, from here on in, there are going to be spoilers galore. Seriously, we're not even going to try and hide them or talk around them. So, if you do not want to be spoiled for Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, stop here and come back whenever you're ready. So, let's get started and focus on one of the more important questions you as the DM should understand about this module. What does the module posit causes evil, right? So, from now, this isn't what causes evil in the real world. Let's have that quick caveat here. We're talking purely about, in the module, what is making all of our villains evil. So, if you look at the module in its entirety, the corruption of good and the nature of evil hinges on the fact that pretty much every evil character we're going to meet is either cosmically evil, which we went into last time, or they've given in to despair. Whatever you want to view that as, we're gonna get over that. So let's first, though, show how we need to get this theme into the module from the beginning. And this module, theoretically, chronologically, starts at the beginning of the timeline, whatever you want to call it. So we're going to talk about the biggest, baddest evil who's going to get name dropped during the campaign, which is Asmodeus. In general, for our D&D world here, he's a lawful evil god. He's got a bunch of different lore available as to who he is, what he does, how he came to be. But for this module, the best lore that you should use is the one that helps to draw parallels between Asmodeus and Zariel, and therefore, since we're working now on structuring our adventure so that we have a narrative hook, this parallel between Asmodeus and Zariel is going to carry through to a lot, if not all, of the villains. Because Asmodeus, while he's a charming liar, he's primarily lawful, and he's evil, but we need to get into understanding why he's evil, right? You could just say he's evil because he's evil, but let's get into it, make him a little more complex of a character. So, you could spend a lot of time on the Forgotten Realms wiki or the old lore books to understand why mortal souls work the way they do in this world. But why exactly is Asmodeus important? Because he's the big guy. He's the one who enforces all of these devil deals we're going to do. So what makes people want to keep making deals with Asmodeus? And how does our understanding of evil being motivated by people giving into despair match up to Asmodeus's motivations? These answers need to be given to your players in the first session. Pretty much, if you're running this, you need to rework Descent into Avernus to focus on this cosmic stuff very early. You should introduce devils and demons very early in your campaign, and essentially the very first time the players ever hear about a devil or, devils and demons, you just give them a lore dump. Turn to whoever in the party looks like they would know this and be like, here's the difference between a devil and a demon, and here's why people make pacts with devils. I had a handout. It was on Roll20. I'm going to read you now what we wrote there. You can change it, but this is the essential bit that you need to give them. And it's a bit long, which is why I made it into a handout. You could probably cut this down significantly. So it reads, when the world was new, the world was chaos. Demons fought in a never-ending cycle until one day, the gods came up with the concept of law. To impose law on the world, the gods waged war on the demons, but as gods are fickle beings, they soon grew tired of fighting the demons, and thus they created angels, celestials, whichever term you want to use. The mightiest of this race was Asmodeus, and he was instructed to fight the demons, and he did. He fought demons for years, generations, and slowly, he and his followers took on demonic traits, but tempered them with their knowledge of law. The gods grew to fear Asmodeus' power and dedication to law, and they found him a useful tool to keep the demonic hordes from overwhelming the prime material plane, but they still feared what he was becoming. Mortals were of interest to demon and god alike, for they had free will. It was Asmodeus who introduced the concept of punishment to law in this world we're working with. And Asmodeus and his companions were the forces of law's punishment on transgressions great and small. They were cruel, and this was an affront to our good gods, and so they didn't want Asmodeus entering their realms under the color of law to torment those souls that the gods had found wanting. Asmodeus sensed an opportunity and offered to conduct the punishment in Baator. But he was like, hey, but that's going to separate us from the divine realms, and so we need divine energy so that we don't cease to exist. And he cut a deal with the gods. We'll do all of our punishment there, but we get the divine energy from the souls we take there. The gods agree, and this is part of the Pact Primeval. Those that are evil go to Baator, and devils may work and contract with mortals, and because of that, the universe essentially forces mortals and devils and gods to all sort of agree to this cosmic setup and forces devils to do what they say they're going to do. Eventually, when the good gods learned that Asmodeus and his followers were, ascending into godhood because they were luring so many souls and tempting them with evil, we have a big celestial battle. Asmodeus is wounded and gets banished and cast into Baator, and there we go. The good gods could break the Pact Primeval, but they won't because the gods of law are lawful, and Asmodeus won't break the Pact Primeval either by trying to screw over mortals or take more souls than he's earned in his own sick way, so that because he knows once it's broken, it's, all of the good gods will not have a reason to, check him. So that's the Pact Primeval. And the important thing here is that it takes Asmodeus and uses a version of him where he's not just evil because he's always been evil. Maybe he was flawed, maybe whatever, but the point is that at one point he was good, but then all of the things that he was doing eventually drove him to despair. And this is why it's important, because with that background in mind, his fascination with Zariel is now no longer this general evil principle, right? Asmodeus gets what it's like to do what the gods had Zariel do, right? He knows what it's like to watch and participate in this never-ending war at the gods' request and see that the rest of the gods are kind of abdicating all responsibility for the mortal souls that they're supposed to be caring for. And Asmodeus, he was like, well, yeah, that's an unenviable task, and he sees that, he had to do it, and he views this struggle that he gave into. He looks at that and he wants to believe, he's proud. He wants to believe that his corruption and surrender to evil was inevitable. So enters Ariel. She reminds him of himself, and in getting her to fall, he's able to, sate his own pride. What he did in his mind now isn't any different than what any other good divine celestial being would do when subject to the fickleness of the other gods. Now, the important thing here is that you can't let that make you think that this means, oh, well, Zariel can be redeemed, so can Asmodeus. The difference is, when Zariel lost hope, she surrendered to despair, and Asmodeus, even if you have him be a good creature beforehand, he buckles down and he makes calculating decisions to, destroy the mortal races for his own power. It's a lie when he says that anyone in my position would do the same, because your hope, because D&D is high fantasy, heroic fantasy, is that your players are not going to do the same when they get to Avernus, right? Your goal is that your players are going to look at every temptation to do evil and say, no, we're not going to do it that way. And that's important because you need to keep that in mind, that your players are going to be serving as this example of this, scrappiness, this unwillingness to give in. That is going to be one of the many things you need to do a better job of justifying Zariel being redeemed at the end. Because right now, as the module's written, if you've read it, the redemption for Zariel at the end is pretty weak. And so that's why, like, having Asmodeus as this big evil force that everyone is aware of and understands, like, yeah, no, he's not redeemable. And the difference is that Zariel's actions, even, condemning El Terrell, all of the other evil that she's doing, it's not the same thing. It's still evil, it's still bad, but you want to be able to compare her with Asmodeus. The players need to be able to see that, the way she acts has to be different than Asmodeus. He's going to be a charmer, a liar. He's going to try and get them to do evil things. Whereas Zariel is going to need to be, she's still got to be her proud zealot self, but everything that she wants to do needs to be something that the players can kind of get behind, but not the way she wants to do it. The players should be like, you know what, maybe ending the Blood War is a good idea, but maybe not by damning mortal cities to turn into, devil foot soldiers. And without taking this moment to, examine what does evil mean in Descent into Avernus, you're going to lose some of these little bits and pieces that will help you role play Zariel and agents of Asmodeus or Asmodeus himself. So, those are, however, cosmic, big evil, right? For chapter 1, we're really not getting into that. Instead, we're going to be dealing with regular-ish people, and so you want the players to see these people who give into evil, and you want them to be able to eventually draw the same sort of parallels to Zariel, to Asmodeus, that there's some people who give in to evil after watching terrible things and feeling powerless. I think you should try and reframe as much of the pre-Avernus stuff with this in mind. Even a fairly minor character like Zaj, he's still evil, but you can do some stuff with him that makes him more than just a standard flaming fist corrupt cop, right? He's evil, yes, but he's also frustrated that the best way he can keep Baldur's Gate together is by knocking heads. He's old, he's bitter, and he's tired of trying for decades to make the lower city work. He's got a grudge against the City Watch because he views them, they're like gatekeepers to the upper city, and everyone up there is just sort of watching the lower city destroy itself. And so now you've got not just a corrupt cop, you've got a guy who, has been beaten down by the world and he gave up. He's more than just a corrupt cop. He's now a three-dimensional character. And if your players spend a significant amount of time with the Flaming Fist, he's now more interesting to deal with. Like when he sees them come back from the Dungeon of the Dead 3, and he's like, hey, you guys actually, you did it. You did something, and the city's going to be a little bit better if you have some side quests where the party, does something that helps the city. If they, for example, turn in some corrupt Flaming Fist, and he might be able to start seeing like, hey, maybe there isn't, maybe the whole world hasn't gone to hell. And so he's minor though. He's not that important. You can probably run all of Descent into Avernus with Zaj getting maybe 10 minutes of screen time. So let's move on to some of the more important human villains from chapter 1. We'll probably do a more in-depth video on humanizing all of the Vanthampurs. We're not going to make them not evil. That's important. All of these villains need to still be evil, but we want to humanize them. We're going to touch right now on just Amric and the Duke here because both of them play into this whole despair leads to evil theme that we have going. To do that, though, we do have to change Amric a little bit, right? The first thing is that if you want the players to believe that he's kind of given up, he's became evil because he tried everything else and didn't work, he's evil because that's what works. First, you got to change the dynamic in that first meeting with him where he's not in charge of the devil. Give the devil the power in that relationship there. But let's get into that scene later. For now, let's focus on the fact that we don't want him to just be a mustache twirling bad guy, right? He is, at this point, just a corrupt member of a powerful evil family. He understands that we are extorting people. Sometimes Mortlock goes behind the scenes to break some kneecaps. But for Amric, that's just how Baldur's Gate operates. Maybe, and this is important if you want him to play a bigger role in your campaign, when he was younger, maybe he had some ideals. Maybe he, wanted to try and do some things to make the lower city better. Maybe he looked up to his mother and he was like, she built the sewer, she made things better, I'd like to do the same. But by the time the party meets him, he goes along with his family because anytime he's tried anything different, he fails. And then Mother cleans up after him. You want him not to be naive in the sense that he's innocent, but he's naive because he doesn't know how else to operate in this world besides the way he sees his mother and brothers operating. And because of that, you now have a character who's evil for realistic reasons and reinforces this whole idea that he's given up. He could have done something more. Even his money lending business, you can make he tries to, he gives people money to try and help them, get out. But he's a greedy jerk and his family likes money. So it turns into a loan shark business. He may have gone into it years ago thinking hey, this is going to work. And then no one's paying him back. Mortlock goes out to break some kneecaps for him. And he's just hey, it's up to these people to do something with the money I'm giving them. And if they don't, well, it's Baldur's Gate. What did they think would happen? That alone has now made him a more interesting three-dimensional character, much like Zaj, and he's still evil, right? But it's an evil that has a source that we, as the audience or the storyteller or the players, we could see that and we can make the connection to how that guy is now a stat block in the Low Lantern, right? His mother is another interesting character who, as written, is just kind of evil because she wants power. Good, fine motivation, but we want to tie this adventure together. And so let's look at how she gave into despair to become this evil person, because that's our theme for why people are becoming evil here. So for her, it's pretty easy, right? She's literally trying to rebuild Baldur's Gate, and every time she makes a little advancement, the city finds new and interesting ways to tear itself apart. You need the party to meet her long before the final conflict in Chapter 1. They need to see her voice her frustrations with the other four dukes, right? With the Grand Duke. She needs to be upset with how corrupt the Flaming Fist is. And remember, they are corrupt. She's not just making that up. And she needs to be upset. She grew up in the lower city. She knows what it's like there. And look at how all of these rich snobs, who she's also trying to impress, she wants to fit in with them. But these rich snobs all look down on her in her mind because she came from nothing. And look at how they mistreat the lower city. Despite all the work she does to get the sewers infrastructure running, the city is sabotaging itself left and right. If we ended that description of her character right there, she sounds like a fairly sympathetic character. But it's this frustration and this inability to accomplish her goals in a good or moral way that makes her a perfect target for Zariel, right? Let's face it, again, without the devil worship, without her evil plan, she's probably not that bad, but it's because she can't succeed without that she becomes evil, right? She needs to honestly believe that Baldur's Gate is going to benefit from very tough love that she and Zariel are going to give it. She needs to truly believe that the city is falling apart and it needs her to pull it together however she can. She needs to be very proud. She needs to be very arrogant. But she also needs to honestly believe she's the only one who can fix this city. She is, going into a conflict with the Grand Duke, with the Flaming Fist, with the heroes, your players. And she's still evil. And she has no qualms about murdering anyone in her way or for her convenience. But now our new take on the Duke is she's not just going after power. She wants power. Power's good. It's going to help her do what she wants. But what she wants is to save her city, whatever it takes. She's convinced nothing else will work. And so when she appeals to Zariel, which your players will probably never see, its background only you, the DM, are going to know, it's going to be an appeal that's done out of frustration and despair. There might be a desire for power that's there. She might have come to the realization the city needs a strong man and I'm that person. But it's despair that the city needs a strong man and the city can't just go on as it's doing. So when the party finally meets her, fights her at the end of the first chapter, it should feel very different than fighting a monster. Yes, it should be a brutal fight, push the party to the limit, probably change her to a legendary creature of some sort, even though, it's still, level 5 or 6? Because, this should be their introduction to, your big theme about, despair, right? They're not fighting a monster. They're fighting an evil human, and that's important because you're going to have lots of pure monsters once they get to Avernus, who could be gleefully evil to be evil, and it's actually going to be very fun as the DM to be able to, cackle like a devil here and there. But for Duke Vanthamper, she is giving everything up for the city. She knows what she's doing is evil. She knows that her methods are unquestionably wrong. But while the party is fighting her, they need to sense that she is desperate and in despair, and that, what she wants is for Baldur's Gate to be saved. She's going about it in the wrong way, but by the time the party is at this point, they should be able to see, no, Baldur's Gate does kind of suck. We do need to fix the city somehow. And the moment where they're fighting her is when the party is going to get that moment where they realize, hey, it's not that hard to be tempted to do something evil, right? She's where you want your players to feel that they might end up if they give in to this temptation. Because by this point in the adventure, despite the fact that it's in the title, they're realizing now, oh yeah, we are going to Avernus. All of the devil stuff is playing out, and this is it. We now know we're going there very, very soon. And now they get to see an example of what happens to people who give in to devils, right? Sure, she's trying to justify her desires with a cloak of goodness, but the players get to see that she's still evil. But she's no longer a classic Saturday morning villain. She's a tragic villain. She chose every step of the way to become more and more evil. And the players should be able to look at her and feel, if she had been a stronger person, a better moral center, she could have been a force for good. She's beyond redemption. That needs to be important because there's very few people you want to be redeemed, because if you just redeem everybody along the way, it cheapens the Zariel redemption at the end, which is already pretty cheap feeling until we fix it. So she's irredeemable, but she's still human. And she's human in a way that the players could see themselves becoming if they too give in to the despair like she did and start cutting deals with demons left and right. And the last human villain we're going to touch on here that helps reinforce this theme is Thavius Krieg. In the module, he doesn't really get a lot of time to shine. He's another villain who, odds are your players are going to hear about him here and there, and then module is written, he might get 15 to 30 minutes of screen time, if that. So, let's take the Krieg of the module, change him, and figure out how to make him not just a standard evil preacher, right? So why did Krieg give in to evil? What is his tragic flaw? He prays to his god, his city is dying, it's overrun by a vampire and his minions, nothing happens. He prays, nothing's happening. He's trained in religion. He knows the difference between cosmic good and evil. He understands that he shouldn't contract with evil forces and what doing that could potentially do to him and maybe to Elturel. Other people in Elturel, they're arming themselves to fight the vampire lord and his minion. Krieg retreats into prayer. So, why does this happen? Because Krieg at his core is a coward. That is how the despair that he has manifests. he is a coward. Because remember, in the world of D&D, prayer literally has power. As in, people pray, clerics gain spells and abilities, and usually spells and abilities that are particularly good at fighting vampires and their minions. Krieg's faith isn't nearly as strong as he presents it at any point in time, then or now. He refuses to, take up the arms of his faith to fight. He retreats into prayer. Instead of being like, hey, give me a spiritual weapon and guiding bolt and let's go do some smiting, he keeps going down the divine Rolodex until someone solves his problem for him. Instead of him using his faith as a weapon, he hides behind whoever will come out and fight his battle for him. He needs to hate the good gods, but not because of their goodness, but because they abandoned him. Again, they abandoned him. He doesn't really care too much about Elturel. He likes the city, but it was his own personal safety that caused him to retreat into prayer and give in. When Zariel hears him calling out through the mystical darkness or whatever, she sees his hatred and his cowardice, but she also sees something like a lost soul in him, right? He's been abandoned, and that's a reflection of how she too had been abandoned and betrayed by both the gods when they were like, nah, don't get involved in that blood war. Let the mortals figure it out themselves, as well as when the Hell Riders abandoned her. Krieg is a broken man, and he's seeking to escape any pain or suffering that may come his way, even those that he has, forced onto his city. He's a coward, and the module, for some reason, has Zariel still elevate Krieg, and I don't like that. To Zariel, betrayal and cowardice are two of the greatest evils that she's ever experienced in her life. The gods betrayed her, and the Elturian Hell Riders gave in to their cowardice and abandoned her. And she cuts a deal with Krieg where she's like, hey, betray your city, I'll help you out. He does it, but he doesn't just betray his city. When it's time to collect, when Zariel is like, okay, Elturel's mine now, he abandons his people because he's a coward. I don't see her elevating him, but what this means is that as the players learn more about Krieg, they talk to Rhea about Krieg, and finally encounter him below the Vanthamper Villa. What you need here is that Krieg's cowardice is what makes him irredeemably evil. He's not going to be that memorable compared to Vanthamper, but he should still be a tragic but human villain. So this has been an unnecessarily long discussion of despair and evil and making these villains important, and this might be enough. We may not actually go back and talk more about the human villains indirectly, so I think what we do want to do next is talk about humanizing the Vanthampers, not about how they became evil and all of that, but just things the module doesn't do well to make them feel not like stat blocks with names. For Krieg, the best way to humanize him is by playing up his and Rhea's relationship, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then once we've dealt with our human villains, we can finally go in and talk in depth about Zariel and the Blood War, because you kind of need to understand all of that. So, I hope that gives you a little bit to think about on how to make your villains and this theme of evil more relevant throughout Descent into Avernus, at least the early part, and maybe in a week or two we'll have, I'll have taken some time to write up enough that I can talk about one of those other topics. Anyway, thanks for listening.